Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. You probably already noticed, but this channel recently reached 500,000 subscribers. That is bananas. I cannot believe that there are this many people on the planet who are willing to watch me rant about video games and electronics and things like that. And so I'm just full of gratitude, and I just wanted to say thank you for that. I'm also a little bit overwhelmed because that's such a huge number. That's literally half the population of the state of Hawaii, which is crazy. Now, I'm not very good at celebrating this kind of stuff, but I do try to make a pause every time that I hit a big milestone and do something special. Last time around when I hit 400,000, I did a big long Q&A. Prior to that, I did a studio tour when I hit 200,000. And so I thought it was a good time to maybe do an update to that since it's been about 2 years since then. Now, a lot has changed over the past couple years since the last time I made a studio tour video. It's probably been pretty seamless for you as a viewer just because I like to trickle these things in, but for me it's been like super disruptive. Not only do I have this regular room right here, but I have another room that I've been working on for, I don't know, months at this point. And so I'm going to show off a couple surprises in that other room that you might find pretty awesome. Now, before we get started, I do want to make one caveat, and that is if you've ever seen a studio tour video where like everything looks nice and pristine, you know, it's usually from like a photographer or minimalist YouTuber. This is not going to be that video. I'm not going to glamorize anything. After all, my studio is a working space. So for example, I gave up on cable management like a year ago. I used to try to clean everything up and make it presentable, but then I realized that I would have to undo that all the time because I had a new product that I needed to test or whatever happened to be. And so as a result, I just kind of let all the cables go. As long as it's not a tripping hazard and it, isn't totally ugly, then I usually leave it as it is. Now I cleaned up a little bit, it's kind of like inviting guests over into your house, and so I did make sure that everything was at least a little bit presentable, but for the most part, this is just going to be a raw, like unedited footage talking about my working space and how I use it. Anyway, let's just go ahead and dive in, and I think before we start talking about this room, let's talk about where we came from in the first place. I started going YouTube full-time about 2 years ago, and that's when I moved into the studio, and this is where I do my daily work. But prior to that, the 2 years before that, I was working out of my house. And I mentioned it before, but space in Hawaii is at a premium. And so I only have like one little space to actually work with in our house. We've got 3 generations of people living here. So this is what we call like our storage closet. It's actually a room, but we have all of our extra stuff in here. And this is where my original desk is. And so as you can imagine, it's very difficult to film within this space. And I know my wife is going to kill me for showing this footage in the first place. But I did want to show off that for the first 2 years of this channel, I was basically working out of a storage closet, and I still do all my editing within here as well. Now, to the left of my main desk, I do have some storage shelves, and here I put a bunch of different handhelds. Many of these are just handhelds that I'm currently working on or haven't moved over to the studio just yet. One thing of note, my main computer here is actually my ROG Ally. So I have this hooked up to the XG Mobile eGPU, and this has been my primary Windows PC for about a year at this point. And I love this setup because it doesn't take up a lot of space, but it still gives me a very powerful gaming machine. So if I ever want to play any sort of PC game, this is typically how I will do it at my desk. Now this desk right here has the original green mat that I used to use back in 2020 when I first started up this channel. And before I moved over to the studio, this was the primary location where I did all of my filming. Now since then, I've replicated my green mat setup here in the studio, and so I do all of that recording here now. But if you ever saw any of my old footage, for example, when my cat Chicken used to come and visit while I was recording, that was done here at the house. Now, Chicken passed away about 6 months ago. It's been pretty rough without her, but that's one of the reasons why I don't record at this desk anymore. It's just got too many memories, and so I moved everything over to the studio, and it's been a lot better. Also, friendly reminder, make sure that you hug your pets and tell them that you love them, because there's going to come a day where you want to, and you're not going to be able to. I don't want to get all sappy here, but let's go ahead and start talking about this studio now and the tour itself. Now let's start with the stuff in the background here. This is what I call the white room. So I have a whole wall of stuff, and I want to go through this one by one. First thing is the couch, which is actually a love seat, but I call it the couch. Now, I used to film a lot from this seating position right here, but nowadays I don't really use it that often, mostly because it's a pain to set up. I have to get the tripod and the camera, then I have to go and get a boom arm and a mic and all that, and so it takes a while to actually get it set up, and so instead I've been filming from this location. This allows me to just stand and talk to the camera like this. I got my mic right here, so it just takes 2 seconds to set up. So I've really been focusing on efficiency with this studio over the past year or two, and that's mostly so that I can make videos faster and then also get more videos out because of it. And so yes, the couch is still here, and I don't really film from it that much, but it is a place for me to hang out and relax. To the left of that, I have a light wand, which I use as an accent light. I'll leave links to all this stuff in the video description in case you want to read more about them. Now above the couch, I've got two pieces of art. The left one is a print from Sonic Spinball, and the one on the right is from Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, but mixed up with the Great Wave of Kanagawa. Another iconic part of this whole studio setup is my CRT television. I've had this for a couple years now. This is a JVC, I think it's like 11 or 12 inches, and I mostly will just use this to play a slideshow of various games. When I first set up the studio, I actually had old consoles hooked up to it, and I would switch out the games periodically, but that became a lot of work, and so I went a simpler route. Now, tucked away within my shelving, I've got a hidden mini PC that's running Batocera, and so this is outputted directly into the TV, and this is where I get my slideshow. And I made a whole setup video for this mini PC in particular and getting it all up and running, and so I moved it over to the studio once I was done. The way I control this mini PC is using the 8BitDo arcade stick right here in front of it, and so I'll use this to navigate through Batocera to either launch a single game so you can see the title screen as I'm talking, or to play a slideshow like you can see right now. So now let's talk about this shelving and all the little secrets and treasures that I have within it. Some of this will be a repeat of my last studio tour, but some of these things have changed, at least in a subtle way. On the bottom right, I have a collection of NES games, as well as a Funko Pop figurine of Master Chief. This was the rank that I had in the Navy before I retired, and so it's just a little homage to my service. Above that, I have more Nintendo games, including some that are still in the box. Now, this is a mixture of Nintendo games that are my very favorite, as well as some that I can actually afford. For example, the Mario 3 box right here is not an original box, that's a reproduction box just because they are so expensive, but it is one of my favorite games, so I did buy that reproduction box. Everything else is original. Now to the left of that, I have my original Nintendo Wii that I bought back in 2006. And then I also have a Wii U that I bought aftermarket maybe 3 years ago at this point. I've actually never set this up. It's one of those things that I always want to get to. I want to do a jailbreak and all that stuff. I just never gotten around to it. Now at the very bottom of the shelf, I've got an Xbox 360. I still use this from time to time to rip games from the disc. And then also I have a basket of controllers. These are all going to be OEM or original controllers. Some of these are like from my childhood or other ones that I bought on eBay after the fact. I mostly use all of these controllers when I'm making a thumbnail. For example, if I'm going to show a device and then surround it with a bunch of different controllers, I'll usually pull them out of this basket. Now to the left of the shelf, I have a couple new additions, including the Famicom and Famicom Disk System. My friend Tim over at Team Bandori sent these over from Japan, and I've been really excited to add these to my collection. And I have been building a Famicom cartridge library over the past several months, and so I'm excited to test this out later. Below that, I have an old Sega Genesis, including Jurassic Park, one of my favorite games for that console. Further down, I've got a bunch of Sega Genesis games, and then I also have this Mega Man Funko Pop. I'm actually not a huge fan of Funko Pop, but it's just really easy to get these figurines, and I used to have a different one here. Instead, it was the BioShock Little Daddy. We'll see that later in this video. Moving up to the top of the shelving, I have an old GameCube, as well as my original Wavebird controller. Unfortunately, the controller does not work anymore, but the GameCube does. Behind that, I've got a PlayStation 2 as well. I've planned on modding both of these consoles for years at this point. I just haven't gotten around to it. I've just been so busy making other videos. Moving over to the center, I have an old Super Nintendo. I bought this at a pawn shop back in 2001. It is super beat up, but that's kind of one of the reasons why I like it so much. And yeah, it still works just fine, which is awesome. Above that, I've got a couple Lego pieces. So one is going to be the Super Mario 64 block, and then I've also got a Piranha Plant. This one is also a new addition. Another thing you'll see throughout this video are a bunch of sound panels. These are all from Elgato, and they're pretty expensive, but they do a great job dampening the sound and reducing reverb. So I use this in all my rooms. Anyway, yeah, that's a quick look at the shelving itself. I've got a little bit of a story for each one of these, but I don't want to make this video like 2 hours long. So let's move on and start talking about the arcade cabinets I have to the left. Now, the last time I did a studio tour video, I had both of these cabinets, but the Ridge Racer one was still in its box. Obviously, since then, I have put it together. But other than that, I really haven't done much for either of these things. These are both arcade 1-up cabinets, and I have plans to upgrade these with new accessories and whatnot. In fact, I've bought all of the stuff, I just haven't put it together. These things are kind of a pain in the butt to take apart, and so I've been just dreading that whole process to the point where I just never got around to it. The idea is that the one on the right, the Marvel vs. Capcom one, I'm going to use that to basically install just a ton of different arcade games. The one on the left will be all driving games, so I'm going to include things like, like Outrun and Hard Drivin', all these games that I really loved as a kid, all in the same cabinet. And each of these will be a weekend project on their own, and I think because it takes so much of a time investment, I just never gotten around to it. Instead, I always think to myself, well, you can make a full video that's going to be helpful for others, or you can make these arcade cabinets, and I always choose to make the videos instead. So who knows, maybe someday you will see an updated video where I've put in arcade systems in this, but it hasn't been a super high priority for me. Thankfully, my kids and I love to play these games already as they are, and so we get a lot of use into these arcade cabinets, we just haven't done the upgrades yet. A couple background notes is that I have to use a fill light for these arcade cabinets because they're so far away from the window that it gets pretty dark in this corner, and so as a result, I do have to use a fill light just to make everything a little bit more balanced like you can see in this shot. In addition, I've got a bar stool that came with my Marvel vs. Capcom cabinet, but I often will not have this in the shot just because the chrome itself is a little bit shiny and distracting, and so often I will have to move this seat out of the way when I actually film. Now to the left of the arcade cabinets, I have something really special. Last time that I did my studio tour video, an artist reached out to me and said, hey, I make these graphics that are Star Wars themed, and I'd love to show them in your studio. And the artist's name is Felipe de Carvalho, and I actually was already familiar with their work. I had seen their icon pack previously. In fact, I used some of these icons as the background image on my iPad for quite some time, so I was really kind of starstruck that the artist himself wanted to send me something to put in my studio. Anyway, I think it's a perfect fit for this studio, and so thanks Philippe again for sending that over to me. Okay, so in a nutshell, that is the main wall here in the white room of my studio. Let's flip it over and actually talk about the stuff that I'm looking at here on this side of the wall. Let's start by talking about my desk where I spend most of my time, and this has also gone through quite a few changes. The biggest change is I've converted over to a standing desk, and this was mostly for health reasons. I was spending so much time sitting down between recording and editing and everything else that I just felt like I was sitting down too much, and so I ended up paying a bunch of money to get a standing desk shipped over to Hawaii, which is not cheap. And we'll talk about the desk itself in a minute, but let's talk about the stuff on it first. On the left side, I have my MacBook Pro. This is the laptop that I do all my video editing on. And so I take this laptop back and forth between the house and the studio every day. That's where I get all my editing done. To the right of that, I have a mini PC, and this is for all my Windows-based work, and I have a rotating cast of characters when it comes to these guys, and so this one is never going to be the same. It's always changing out. Now in the center of the desk, I have my trusty keyboard, which you've probably seen in a bunch of my different footage. I love this thing. I use it all the time. To the right of that, I have my trackball. Now, I used to use a mouse, but I also again found that for health reasons, I was gripping the mouse too much and it was hurting my hands. And so I switched over to trackball, and I've been enjoying it ever since. And I have the exact same setup at the house as well, so that way it's a pretty seamless transition as I'm editing between the two. Now also on the desk I have my capture card, and this doesn't really need to be on the desk, but I love the fact that it has RGB lighting. Now this capture card was actually sent over by Asus to improve the quality of my capture cards because I was using something that was a lot older and crappier, and so I'm pretty appreciative of that. I never got around to actually making a review of this capture card, but I told them at some point I would maybe showcase it in a video, so I think now's a good time for that. Number one, it can record up to 4K at 60 frames per second, which I think is a good standard benchmark when I'm trying to test out mini PCs. In addition, it works with OBS right out of the box, which is what I use to record my footage, and so that's really handy as well. It also has a variety of programmable color options that you can use. I personally just leave everything on party mode. That gives me the rainbow RGB that I like so much on my desk. And I think it's just a nice little pop of color on a desk, which is mostly pretty brown and plain. Now to the right of that, I have my audio interface, which is what this mic will plug into, and then this is also then plugged into either a computer or the camera, depending on what I'm recording. And my setup is pretty simple, and a lot of people have something very similar. So I use the Shure SM7B, which has been around for like 25 years at this point. It's a good standard podcasting mic, and so that's why I use it. I think it does a really good job of enhancing my voice. Now, one of the issues with the SM7B is that it has very low gain, and so a lot of people use what they call the cloud lifter or something similar to boost the gain. Now, this isn't necessary, but it does make the recording process easier, so I do have one of these hooked up to my mic. From there, I plug it into my USB audio interface. So this will take the mic input and then put it through USB over to my computer. Now, if I was starting over today, this is not the equipment I would buy. There are upgraded versions of all of this. For example, just recently, Shure released the SM7DB. This is going to be the exact same mic as before, but it has that mic gain already in it, so you don't need the cloud lifter. And it's about $100 more than the other one, but it's less than the $150 more for the cloud lifter, so you end up saving $50 by just getting this mic. Additionally, there's a new generation of the Scarlett Solo, and this one has the mic input on the back, which I think looks a lot cleaner than what I have set up right now. So if I was going to do it all over from scratch, I would get the SM7DB and then the new generation Scarlett Solo. Either way, my current setup works out just fine, so I've got no problems with it whatsoever. Now let's talk about the desk itself. And when it comes to standing desks, not many of them will actually ship to Hawaii. So for example, like FlexiSpot, which I think is like the most popular one, they don't ship here at all. Instead, I went with Uplift. Now, they're pretty expensive, but they have high quality. The shipping was also very expensive. It was almost the price of the desk itself. Either way, I think the desk looks really good in my space, and I'm happy with the purchase. I just wish the shipping was a little bit cheaper. Now here's a look at that cable management I was talking about before. It is exacerbated even more by using a standing desk because the cables have to be able to move freely when I move the desk up and down. Either way, yes, I'm happy that I transitioned over to a standing desk, and I think Uplift makes really good stuff. I like the fact that everything is programmable as well. Now, the monitor on my desk is just a standard 32-inch from LG. It gets 4K and 60 frames, exactly what I need to do all my editing. Now, above that, I have one of my cameras, and that's always really weird to say that I have multiple cameras, but that's probably the major thing I've learned over the past couple of years working in the studio, is that I would rather have multiple cameras with maybe mediocre lenses as opposed to some really good lenses and having to swap them out all the time with the same body. And so what I have is a bunch of stationary cameras like this one right here, the Canon R8. Either way, it's a very video-centric camera and it lives right here above my monitor. And so this is what I use when I'm recording like podcast episodes or some of this talking head footage. To the right of that, I have a light box. Now I don't use this very often. This is actually an Elgato key light with a generic box on top of it. But if I'm going to be recording and it's a little bit darker outside, then I'll turn this on just a little bit to help fill out the front light. This is not something I have to do very often because there's a huge window right here. But if I need to, like it's a rainy day or in the evening time, that's how I will record. Now over by my feet, I have another PC. This is my Windows computer that I've had for years at this point. This is the one that I use for all my retro gaming. So I have all my ROM stored on this. And then also if I need to do video capture footage, for example, I'm making a tutorial, I often will use this PC. Anyway, moving on, let's talk about the center shelf that I have on this side of the wall. On the left, we have my stereo receiver. So this is hooked up to both my computer as well as my turntable, which we'll talk about here in a minute. This is called the Sprout 100, and I've had it for years. In fact, I bought it the very day that it came out, and I've been super happy with it. I use this all the time to listen to my music, and I love it. On top of that, I have the 8BitDo Ultimate Controller. This is the Famicom design and has the dock with it as well. I love this thing. I use it with all my mini PC testing, and often I will use it in my videos as well, just because it looks so nice. Also here, I have a little fake plant that I picked up in Indonesia, and I use this sometimes in my thumbnails. And then also I have a collection of SD cards and USB dongles, all the things that I need to be able to function within the space. Moving on, I have my Nintendo Switch OLED as well as my Xbox Series S. When I first got these and put them here in the studio, I had dreams of, taking breaks and playing video games, but I never really get around to doing that. I usually have other things to work on. But I do play the Xbox from time to time, so I'm really happy that it's here. I've got a nice Starfield controller that goes with it. And then if you look at the back, you can see I have my external hard drive with all my ROMs on it. So if I want to play retro games on the Xbox, I can still do that. I have a full setup video for that as well. I've also got a cheap mouse and an adapter pack from JSO, which helps me with some of my videos as well. On the wall, I've got a deconstructed Game Boy Color, as well as this motif for 3D relief here from Super Mario Bros. 3. And finally, to the right of that, I have my turntable. It took me a long time to figure out which one I was going to buy, but this is the one I got. And this is a very simple belt-driven turntable that is connected over to my stereo receiver, and then these two bookshelf speakers that I have below. This really isn't the ideal setup for the best audio quality, but I do have pretty limited space. Also here I have a bunch of records. This is only about a quarter of my entire collection, but these are the ones that I tend to listen to the most when I'm doing editing. And so this is one of my favorite pastimes when I'm working, is that I can listen to music while I'm working on something that doesn't require audio. I also appreciate the idea of using vinyl, not just because of the sound, but because it keeps me active. I have to go over and flip the record every once in a while, and so it keeps me on my feet more often. Now to the right of that, I have what I call my working table. This is where I show off HDMI connectivity with my monitor, or if I need to do an unboxing with something that's a lot larger than what I can show on my desk. So this table will often appear in my videos depending on what I'm reviewing. Anyway, that's really about it for what I call the White Room, which is my main studio space, so let's move on. Okay, another surprise reveal of the studio tour video is that I have a whole studio that I've been working on for quite some time now, and this is it right here. Now, this room is the same room I've been using for years. It's the same desk and everything, like the same green mat. I've got the same device, like nothing has changed here in terms of this top-down, like essential retro camcorder video. The only difference is that I'm now using a real camera instead of my iPhone, which allows me to get a little bit of like bokeh, which is the blurriness in the background, but then also I can zoom in a bunch. Look at those details. So now I can kind of get, just better details in my reviews. look at how gross like this Game Boy cartridge is. That's amazing. So those are the things that I'll be able to do with this new camera setup and new lighting and whatnot. But then also, obviously, I have a new camera that I'm showing off here. This is my talking head camera. This whole setup is called a multi-cam setup. So I've got a microphone right here plugged into this camera, so I can talk at the same time that I'm reviewing all my footage here with the top-down stuff. This allows me to basically do first impressions videos. So for example, I've got something where I just want to hit record, test something out, and tell you my initial impressions. This will be an excellent way to do all of that and also minimize my recording as well as editing time. Now, I figured all of this stuff out when I made a video about a month ago. It was talking about different Steam Deck grips, and I recorded it all in one take. It made the editing process really easy. I did ramble on quite a bit in that video, so I do need to practice this whole setup, but I think it's going to be a net benefit for everybody. When it comes down to it, this isn't going to replace the review videos that I usually make. You know, the ones that I spend like 40 hours making and then the video is like 45 minutes long. None of that's going to change. That's still the essential Retro Game Core video, but this is a new dynamic that I can add in, and I like the idea of just kind of pushing and coming up with new stuff as I make new videos. Anyway, I'm really excited about this idea of setting up this whole kind of multicam footage where I can show off the device and talk at the same time. Now, let's talk about the studio itself and some of the changes I've made in this room. I didn't really buy a lot of equipment other than like the recording equipment. All of this was stuff I had on hand, but I was able to kind of strategically put it in places that enhance the video. And so let's talk about the rest of the room now. Okay, so first thing here, this is going to be a work in progress compared to the other stuff that we've seen throughout the video. But I do want to show off at least what I've got set up so far. On the far left, I have this floor lamp, and this illuminates this part of the bookshelf. Like with all the other lights I have in the studio, these are all Philips Hue, not because I love Philips Hue, but because I want to keep everything standard. That way I can just use one app on my phone to turn everything on and off and adjust the colors and things like that. Anyway, let's start by talking about what I have on this bookshelf to the left. At the very bottom, I have an Elgato teleprompter. I'm still trying to figure out the best way to use this, so right now it's still in the box, but I do use this from time to time. To the left of that, I've got a bunch of larger cases. These are mostly going to be for handheld PCs. Above that, I've got my old PS4 and Xbox One, and then a smattering of games and books that I picked up over the years. On the next shelf, I've got a bunch of other games, 360, PS3, PS4, and so on. I've also got an old PSP here that I really love. Now above that, I've got my Switch collection. This isn't every game, but it's as many as I could fit here on this shelf. I mentioned it before, but I like to collect physical Switch cartridges just because I think it's probably going to be the last generation where we can actually collect them. To the right of that, I have a little Easter egg, and those are my cookbooks. And so on the left are my first two books. These are still in print. You can get them on Amazon. However, the third book, which is called the Heritage Cookbook, this one was a limited print run. I had to self-publish this one, and it's a super big book and very expensive. And so I only had like 800 copies made, and those have been gone for years. So at this point, it's only available as an ebook. Either way, I love the fact that it's a mixture of my creative pursuits, the old books that I used to write, and then obviously all the videos that I make today. Now, when you're actually looking at the footage of me talking, they're nice and blurry, so you can't really see that they're my books or anything, but I love the fact that they're still there anyway. Above that, I've got a few more games, including some that I picked up in Japan recently, so Super Nintendo games, as well as some old Famicom cartridges. And I've also got a couple more books, as well as some Famicom Disk System games. At the very top of the shelf, which is actually out of the shot, is just a stack of different handhelds that I have picked up over the years and never got around to reviewing. One of the things I want to do in the future is actually just do impromptu reviews, where I grab one of these off the shelf and then just review it right then and there and see how I like it. Moving on, let's talk about the dresser. On top of that, I've got a little lamp, which again has a Philips Hue bulb, and then I have my original NES. This is the one that I had in my childhood. So it is going to feature pretty prominently in my multicam shots, but I love the fact that it's there. Now, the dresser itself has a rattan design to it, which used to be super popular here in Hawaii back in the 80s and 90s, but it's kind of hard to find now. Thankfully, I actually found this dresser at a local hardware store, so I'm super happy that I have it included in my set just because it gives a very 80s and cozy vibe to it. Now, I also use this dresser for storage. A lot of my most important stuff is here. Up top, I have just various camera equipment, so if I ever need to grab something, it's going to usually be here. And then below that, I have my controller drawer. On the left side, I have all my Bluetooth controllers, and then on the right, I have all my phone controllers, like telescopic controllers, things like that. Below that, I've got my keyboard drawer. This includes caps and switches, and I often will swap these out from time to time, depending on the footage that I'm filming. Below that, I have all my extra games. This will be like Genesis and Nintendo and Super Nintendo, but even my GameCube and Wii collections are down here as well. And then finally, in the bottom shelf, I just have a bunch of other cases. Usually these are going to be for smaller handhelds, like the Anbernics and Retroids. Next, we'll talk about my main display case. Now, this is mostly ornamental, but I have some of these here showcased because I need to be able to grab them when I need them as well. Up top, I've got a bunch of cheaper handhelds, including some of my old favorites. And then on the next shelf, I've got more handhelds, including an old radio that I picked up about 6 months ago. Further down, I've got a couple display devices, including my Analog Pocket and GKD Pixel, and here's that BioShock Big Daddy that I was talking about before. Further down, as you can imagine, I've got even more handhelds, including my old Super Nintendo and NES Classic. These were some of the first things that I ever worked on when it came to understanding emulation way before I started my channel. Below that, I've got even more handhelds. Most of these are used for size comparisons or just to check on the software, things like that. Now, one thing that's pretty cool is my wife found these containers that allow me to put vertical devices inside so I can stack them all up at once, and that's pretty awesome. And then finally on the bottom, I have even more handhelds. These are usually the ones that I'm working on currently and need to have easy access to. Now to the right of that, I have another fill light, kind of like the one on the far left. It's actually the same color temperature and everything, and this is just to add lighting to the overall picture. Now, if we rotate a little bit, you will see my working shelf. So this is where I put all the stuff that I need to be working on. Often I will get things from brands, often without even asking for them first. And so I'll throw them on this shelf. And then anytime I'm trying to come up with an idea, I will usually look at this shelf and say, okay, what's my next video? It's going to be about this thing. It's been enough time. Maybe there's new firmware or whatever. And then I'll start working on it. So just because this is on the shelf, I may or may not actually be working on it, but this is generally just kind of a middle ground black hole that I put all my stuff into before I actually make a video. Now to the right of that, I have a little nightstand. This is where I put all my tools. So if I'm going to be working on a mod or whatever, I usually will have everything on top of or inside of this nightstand. And then finally, my main working space is this desk. And yeah, it kind of looks like a nightmare, but I have everything put just so. For example, up top, I have this big black sheet as well as the contraption to hold it into place. All this is to reduce reflections when I'm reviewing a handheld. And then of course I have my traditional green mat, which you've seen in all my videos. Now the way I record this footage hasn't really changed over the years, but the equipment has. For example, I now use a real camera. This is the Sony a6700. I've got a couple additions to this. For example, it gets pretty hot, so I've added a USB fan. And then I also have this 3D level that I use to make sure that the shot is lined up perfectly. To the right of that, I have my shotgun mic. So this is what I use when I'm recording my footage here in this room. And then behind that, I have my hair light. So this is spilling light directly onto my shoulders in the back of my head, just to give me a little bit of a halo effect when I'm recording to separate me from the background. Now this is a very dysfunctional setup. I use Velcro straps to make sure it's held into place. Either way, this is probably the newest addition to the whole studio setup, and so this is probably still a work in progress. Now on the desk itself, in addition to the green mat, you can see I have a keyboard and mouse. Now this is a low profile keyboard. It costs about $170, so not very cheap, but it is very high quality. You've got a choice in switches between linear red and clicky blues. I went with the linear reds just so it's a little bit smoother. And one feature I like about it is the connectivity options. It has 3 different Bluetooth connections as well as a 2.4 gigahertz dongle, and then you can also use it wired. And taking a closer look at the keyboard itself, you can see that yeah, it is very low profile. In terms of I/O, you've got the ability to switch between your connectivity options and then also Mac and Windows. And it's also got a magnetic holder for that USB dongle, which I think is super handy. Now, one unique feature about this one is that it has a touch bar, so you can actually swap it between different functions like volume and brightness. And then what you do is you slide your finger across the top of it, and that will adjust whatever parameter you have it set to. So personally, I use it to adjust the volume on my PC as I'm using it. You can also use this at 3 different angles. You have your standard angle, which is the one I use, but you can also flip this up either to the mid or the high function. Another thing I like about this keyboard is that it has all of the macro functions labeled on the keys when you look at them sideways. And I think that's a lot handier than having to look at an instruction manual, so I do appreciate that, even though it is a very low profile keyboard. It also comes with a plastic container, so you can actually put the keyboard directly inside of this, and this will dampen the sound a bunch. So I do like that you have an option between having it super simple and sleek, or you can put it in the plastic holder to make it very quiet as well. Another thing I really like about it is the battery life. I think in the 3 months that I've had it, I've only charged it 1 time. This battery lasts forever, even when I have the RGB lighting going. Anyway, to the right of that, I have just a simple Logitech mouse. Nothing special here, it's just the first one that I grabbed for this desk. And then one of the main pieces that I use here at the desk is my Stream Deck. Right now, I don't really have this fully set up. It's only hooked up to my lights right now. But anytime I need to turn off the studio lights, for example, when I'm testing screen brightness, these are the buttons that I will press. Now on the left side of the desk, you can see this monitor. This is hooked up to my top-down camera, so this allows me to look at my footage without having to look up. And then of course, as part of my multicam setup, I have another camera here in the back. This is another Canon R8, so the same one that I'm using to talk to you right now. And like I talked about before, I found it a lot more helpful to have multiple cameras in cheap lenses like this one. Now to the right of the desk, I have another monitor. This is supposed to be hooked up to that camera in the back, but I don't have the correct cables just yet, so this is still a work in progress. But one neat thing about the one on the left is that it's not actually a monitor, this is a full tablet PC. This is the Minisforum V3, which is a tablet PC that I did a whole video on. I really like this thing. In fact, I think that this is kind of overkill for this desk setup right here, but I love the fact that I get to interact with it every day. And so yeah, in a nutshell, this is my second studio room. This is where I get a lot of my work done when it comes to recording footage and testing and stuff like that. And really, I think that's about it for this video. I can't believe how long I rambled about all the stuff I have in the studio, but as you can imagine, it's been many years of work to get this all set up. And, you know, I like to put thought into every little thing, and so I love to share that as well. At the very least, I do hope this was entertaining to find out just a little bit behind the scenes and how I make these videos in the first place. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I am just full of gratitude that we've even hit 500,000 subscribers. It's just an unreal number. I can't believe that we're here. When I first started this channel, I never expected it to go very far at all. Once I hit 100,000, I thought, man, I've made it. I can actually do this full time. I never thought that a few years later I would be at 500,000 instead. And so again, thank you very much for watching these videos. It's just kind of incredible that you're here along for this ride. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below. And as always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.